Hi everyone, and welcome to WERKIN's International Women's Day event on maternity, menopause and menstruation. WERKIN is a company that provides leadership development programs and initiatives to underrepresented communities in large organizations and industry networks. And we are joined here today by Afsana Parvizi-Wayne, the founder of Frida, and Carlika Basnight-Menendez, who is a total hysterectomy thriver, I think is your title on LinkedIn, Carlika, and speaker. So we've got represented here menopause and menstruation. Unfortunately, our maternity speaker could not make it today. They've been pulled away in an emergency, as sometimes happens with medical professionals, I hear. So I'm sure we can cover some opinions on maternity and do a separate event at a later point as well. The reason WERKIN have brought together this panel today, though, on these very real topics of inequality, specifically around women's issues, is not just because it's International Women's Day, but because we run programs and trainings on healthcare inequalities. And we work very closely with lots of different NHS trusts on developing their underrepresented groups and eradicating those inequalities. So what I want to really talk about with our speakers here today is the inequalities that they've observed in their professions and what they've been doing in the past few years to eradicate those inequalities as well. So if I actually start off my name is Alex Dassar, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm head of programs at WERKIN. That's the first thing I will say. But I want to give most of the airtime here to our wonderful panel participants. So if I could start with Afsana, please, could you let us know a bit about what you do, who you are and what you do, please?
Well, thank you, first of all, for providing the platform for this quite an important discussion. So I'm Afsana Parvizi-Wayne, as you said, and I set up Frida, which is an eco-period care brand, back in 2018, in response, actually, to lack of access that I was witnessing amongst the refugee community. So this is how I started. My background wasn't in femcare or femtech at all. I came from a management consultancy background in the automotive industry. So I transitioned from a very male-dominated sector into something that's completely female-dominated. So that's my background and why I set up Frida.
I guess my first question just off the back of that is, do you find that femtech is a female-dominated industry, or tech full stop we consider as quite male still at the moment, but is femtech very, very female heavy?
Well, your audience, your target audience obviously are women. Is it dominated by men finding women finding solutions? There are many women trying to find solutions, but do they get to market? Very rarely, because we're not funded. So I feel that we should have more women with lived experiences collaborating with tech experts, with clinicians to provide the solutions. Not as it has been up until now, is men providing solutions for problems that don't exist, or men providing solutions for problems that they think it exists. And that goes across the women's space.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a little feedback. I'm just going to ask everyone to make sure they're muted. Thank you. That's really interesting, and I want to get into male opinions in this space as well, and the need for allyship in this space too. But I thought it was also really interesting how you started off your journey with Frida, coming from your experience and with refugees, and how I wanted to highlight that just because we're talking about menopause, menstruation and maternity, and how they're mainly women's issues, people who don't identify as women can also experience those things, obviously, although they are in a minority, but we do need to be inclusive in our language. But predominantly they're experienced by women. However, women are not a minority in the world, but there are minorities within underrepresented groups too. So for example, when we talk about maternity, there are significantly higher mortality rates for Black women in childbirth than there are for white women. So we do need to examine those intersectionalities. And I wanted to really just highlight how interesting it was that your experience in founding Frida really stemmed from your experience with the refugee community.
No, totally. And I think the key there is you've got to have experienced, or at least be aware of the problem to admit it's a problem, right? So I think when it comes to women's health, the reason why I think men come up with the wrong solution is because for a lot of the stuff is not a problem for them, right? But if it's not a problem for them, it's not a problem, right? And I found that when I was pitching for investment, I literally had to have a period 101 or menopause 101, because these guys seem to have missed the most basic lessons in biology, right? So I think when we're looking at minorities within a minority, I think in a way we've actually got to look at the bigger picture of lack of knowledge at a higher level, which then trickles down, right? So if as women, regardless of how we identify, if you have a uterus, regardless of how you call yourself, if you've never had those bits of evidence-based information at your fingertips, how can you take control of your health, right? Is if your health depends on adverts that you've been brought up with, right? So if I've been brought up looking at adverts of pads and tampons that show me girls rollerblading in tight white jeans, right? That is not how I experience periods, right? But in fact, that is not how anyone experiences periods, right? We don't go rollerblading in tight white jeans.
No.
And or if I'm shown a pad that has the absorbency ability of a bucket full of blood, right? That normalizes heavy bleeding. Right. So I'm not going to go to a doctor because I think, you know what, I'm just going to buy this maxi pad because I'm told it's going to absorb a bucket full of blood. So I think a lot of problems within the women's health has been normalized where it should have been normalized. And where the conversation should be normalized, it still remains taboo. Right.
And we look to medical professionals. Most of us will look to medical professionals for the answer, when actually the complete woman's vulva, vagina and clitoris wasn't actually included in Grey's Anatomy's medical textbook until I don't know what the date was. It was in the 2000s, I believe. It was reintroduced, and it just this knowledge of what the anatomy looked like was missing for so long. And it's still not taught in a lot of places around the world. So when you don't have that access to knowledge, you can't actually build effective solutions. Thank you. And I will come back with more questions, Asan, in just a minute. Karlika, would you please introduce yourself and what you do, and why you think we invited you to this panel today? What experience you bring to the topic?
Oh, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the platform. I'm glad that more people are having these conversations that a lot of us wished we would have had before menstruation, before menopause, and before maternity. Right. And so what do? I help women navigate through this journey to regain focus, strength, and confidence, because all of those things, they play a part in the menopausal journey. And so for me, my journey started at the age of 30. And it's so crazy to me that when I say, oh, yeah, I'm a menopausal woman, everyone's like, oh, you're too young. You don't know. And I'm like, well, who said so, right? I had a total hysterectomy at the age of 30 after being in pain for years and going back and forth to doctors. Here goes birth control. Here goes this, with no real foundation or education. So I love what Afana is saying, right? Where's the education in all of this? Where's the awareness? And so I remember having this hysterectomy and leaving the office with 2 pamphlets. What What am I supposed to do with this? Yes, I could read, but when things started happening, who was I supposed to turn to? I had no community. I had no support. I had no guidance. There were no conversations, right? I hear a few women, they would be like, oh, my personal summer. And I'm like, what does that mean, right? And they're like, oh, you'll find out when you're 50 and 60. Well, you know what? My life changed at 30. Thankfully, I had my children, but still, that journey trying to navigate was hard. It was difficult. Things that happen, and we know menopause is not a one size fits all. But when I remember my first hot flash, and I was standing in the middle of the living room floor, and I literally turned around like, who just turned all the heat up on me? I felt like I was radiating from my head to my feet. And I was like, oh my God, I literally wanted to jump in a deep freezer like butt naked, like frostbite everywhere. I did not care. And I was like, oh my God, right? What is going on? So even though my background is in biology, right? I didn't care about all those science things. I wasn't thinking of science terminology. I wasn't saying, let me go find my biochemistry book to see what's going on. I needed help. And you know who are the people saying, oh, women go through this all of the time? The women who did not have a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
So there was no empathy, there was no conversation, there was no community. So I was left to figure this journey out. And that's why I do what I do.
And how did you figure that out? Obviously, it took a lot of time, Carlika, but was there anyone that helped you, or any information resource center, anything that you did feel like was a support for you on your journey?
Not at all. Unfortunately, not at all. I was YouTube University, right? Googling and all of these different things. And even when I had my follow-up appointment, the doctor, she pretty much was just like, well, she briefly skimmed over like HRT, right? But at that time, I was a person overcoming anorexia and bulimia, right? So all she kept saying is, oh, it's going to make you gain weight. So all I heard was weight gain, wah, wah, wah. And I was like, oh no. So I had tuned her out, and I was like, you know what? I'll just suffer. But then it's like, why would I suggest to myself that I'll just suffer and figure this out? But I was not given enough information to make an informed decision for myself. And so I'm like, wow. So yes, it took a while. It took noticing, like you said, admitting that something is wrong, right? That this is not right. I don't have to suffer, not at home, not in the workplace, not anywhere, because there are resources. Unfortunately for me, I had to dig deep for them. And so I don't want another woman thinking there are no resources, there are no communities, there are platforms like WERKIN, right? There's Frida, there's information. And I do believe the more that we're informed, the more that we can be empowered. And so I went on this journey of seeking, right? Because I was like, I'm not going to live my life looking sad and looking disappointed and being depressed and all of these different things and not really living. So when you see Hysterectomy Thriver, it's not because the journey has been easy, but I do feel more fierce, I'm more free, I'm more empowered. And the more I educate other women, it's like, now we can be empowered so that you can live your life.
That's a great message. Thank you so much, Carlika. And I thank you both for sharing how some of your lived experiences have impacted your journeys and become a core part of who you are. Because if you're a speaker, if you're a founder in this space, it is all consuming. And you must be interacting with lots of people as well, interacting with communities who do experience the things that you now have a lot of knowledge about, subject matter expertise in. Can either of you share anything that's been particularly impactful for you, getting to talk to other women or other people who are impacted by either your products or your what you're speaking about?
Well, I think I'm very sort of moved by what Carlika was saying, because I have another platform called Modern Menopause. And the reason, again, from a lived experience, the reason why I started looking at the menopause was back in 2018, a month after I'd launched Frida. I was having these irregular bleeds, and everybody thought, oh, it must be perimenopause. And I'm married to a gynecologist, right? So, he said, well, I think you should go to the GP and have a scan, right? You shouldn't really be having irregular bleeds, that you need a scan. So I go to my GP and they said, but you're the age, it's, that's what happens. You have irregular bleeds with perimenopause. So I came home and reported back, and he said, no, you go back. If you're a man, they put you on a 2-week pathway, right? You go back and you say, this could be endometrial cancer. So I go back and I say, this could be endometrial cancer. Can I have a gynae scan? 2 weeks later, I'm at the hospital having a gynae scan. There's nothing wrong with me at the gynae, but they see something else, right? So I go on a Monday morning, looking at this irregular bleed, could be a gynae scan. I leave Monday evening with a diagnosis for bladder cancer, right? Now, I'm fine. I went through, thankfully it was caught in time, and, I still had my bladder, but I had to have this horrendous sort of year of treatment. But during this time, I was thinking, this is too important to be left to chance, right? If I wasn't the sort of person who would go digging, if I wasn't married to a gynecologist who'd say, go back, right? I could at best be sitting here without my bladder and half of my innards have gone, or I could be dead at worst, right? So I started looking in the whole menopause space, and I found exactly what Carlika found across the pond, right? And that there's nothing out there, right? Apart from hot flushes, oh, take this supplement, drink this tea, there was nothing else, right? And then I commissioned this amazing illustrator I'd been working with, and we developed something called the menopause bingo. We put all the symptoms and we send it out into the virtual world and ask women saying, this bingo, how many of it do you have, right? The response was extraordinary, right? Women did not recognize 2/3 of the symptoms. They were experiencing it. They didn't know it was menopause, right? Brittle, things with hair, nails, dry vagina, like the only thing they knew was they were having hot flushes, right? And the periods had stopped. The majority had low level anxiety and depression, right? Low level is an elastic term. Low level for one is high level for someone else. They go to the GP, the majority were given SSRIs, right? Nobody at any point said it could be your hormones, right? Low levels of estrogen, like you are in constant PMS, right? So, colleague, I don't know what you feel. I was that we looked into the menopause. I thought, God, it's got a lot in common with puberty, right? Your hormones are all over the place. You don't know what's happening, right? With young girls, they're all going up. Ours is diminishing, but the sensations are the same, right? You have this, this bubbling feeling, and you don't know what's wrong with you. So again, I started looking into the platform, into that space, and realized, oh, there are solutions, but actually they're not evidence-based, right? I don't know what your experience was, Carlika, with that.
I totally agree with you, because like when I think back on the years that I was in pain, right? And going back and forth to the doctors, and me, I'm with my body all of the time, right? I'm only in your office for about 15, maybe 20 minutes, and that's pushing it, right? But you're trying to tell me what's going on with my body. And yes, we have to have more awareness of what's going on with our own bodies, so that when we go in the offices, we can have a conversation, right? It's not a lopsided, because once again, I'm with me all the time. You're only going to see me here and there. And so I remember going in there and almost feeling like what I was saying wasn't true. What I was saying was not valid. That I'm a pain med seeker, like I'm a drug addict. And I'm like, I'm in pain. So when they finally gave the decision, it was literally thrown to me like this: well, you can continue to be in pain, or you can have a hysterectomy. Okay, well, I've already been in pain for about 5 or 6 years. So I'm going to go ahead and take the hysterectomy, right? And so the way that it was presented to me, I still couldn't really make an informed decision, because I didn't want to be in pain anymore. But you're absolutely correct. The only thing was weight gain, hot flashes, weight. And I'm like, for me, yes, the hot flashes were horrible, right? But the mental was worse. The mental of trying to figure out what's going on, the mental of feeling less than a woman, the mental, and some people are like, well, why would you feel less than a woman? Well, though I had kids and I knew I didn't want any more, right? I had 3, but it was still that sense of, I didn't have enough explanation. I didn't have enough education and awareness of this. And so that mental anguish for me was just the worst. And so when you touched on depression and different things, think about people who are already having some mental health issues and things. So now we're talking about traumas, we're talking about life, everyday life. Now we're talking about menopause, menstruation, whether it's maternity, because even when we're in in maternity, right? When we're pregnant, your hormones are all over the place then too. So I equated to, there were times that I had all of the conditions of the weather, right? I would be happy and I'm just bubbly. And then it's a downpour of rain. And I'm like, why am I crying? I don't even know. And then parts of anger, like not knowing what to do, not even knowing how to really communicate what was going on. And then feeling like, am I the only one going through this? And who really cares? Right? Because I'm still in the workforce. So who really cared when you have supervisors like, well, do you want to stick your head in a freezer? Well, no, not really. How about vice versa? Right? So you have these, all of this mental. So menopause is not just the menopause, menstruation, or maternity. It's not just the readily symptoms, right? It is mental that people are going through. When we think of postpartum depression and all of these things, that's mental. When we think of menstruation and your hormones and you're feeling like, oh my God, I just can't. That's mental. When we think of menopause, I'm not talking about just night sweats or the vaginal dryness. There are remedies for all of this, right? It's resources. But when are we really going to tap into that mental aspect of it? That this is what's making women feel depressed and have this elevated anxiety. And then even if I'm in the workplace, who can I go and talk to? Is the open door policy really open door?
Yeah. And I do want to pick up on, thank you both for sharing, again, incredibly insightful. I do want to reiterate that we are sharing this with NHS workers as well. So I think it's really valuable for clinicians to hear these conversations that are happening as well, because as you've both said in this chat, and then somebody in the messages, in the chat messages has also said, my normal is not someone else's normal. So you know what your normal is. It's people and usually men not understanding, not believing pain, not understanding what someone's threshold is to be able to give them a proper solution. Like I think we were saying as well, Afsana, you were sharing your, again, very personal journey of going in and finding something else. And only because you were told to, you had a gynecologist and a very close one at that to kind of urge you into doing that. And it's this, I heard this this great thing, again, the school of YouTube, the school of TikTok, the school of Instagram. Always go, if you know something is not right with your body, always go in and ask the doctor for a differential diagnosis, because professionally they have to have a differential diagnosis of what else could it be? I've given you this solution, but how else could we treat this? What else could it be? So always getting that kind of even second opinion from them. I'm seeing a lot of people.
Alex, can I say this? Definitely, like, that sounds really good, right? Gosh, it does. But we, even when we're advocating for ourselves, to go in the office and feel that you're not even being heard, or someone's not even listening to you to say, okay, yes, let's explore something else. Right? Until we get to the surface, but you want to write me a prescription and you want to give me some meds. And then when I'm coming back to say, look, something's not right. Right? You almost feel, in layman terms, you almost feel dumb and more confused walking out the office. And so I think community is so important, but even as women, we have to be willing to have the conversations, because I hear so many women, oh my God, don't put my name in the same sentence as menopause. And I'm like, well, you're eventually going to get there, right? Unless whatever that looks like for you. And they don't want to relate. They don't want to embrace it or even hear about it until it starts happening. So I'm all about, how can we even be more proactive? And thank gosh, I'm saying her name all wrong, that she had someone else to say, no, go back. Go back. But how many people don't even have the opportunity to go the first time?
You're absolutely right. I always think, although whoever said in the chat box, somebody's normal is somebody else's abnormal, possibly. But one thing I think we've all experienced as women and as patients, you always are proving a negative, right? So, you have, if, and I find that as a founder, actually, so when I go and pitch, I'm pitching against a negative perception. I've got to prove, right, that there is a need for this, right? I have to prove to you that my pain is real, right? I have to prove to you that I'm not just a woman feeling this pain, that is actually real. So I think one thing that we all face, and I always say, is proving a negative. We need to remove the negative, right? We need to be believed, we need to be heard. And I do agree with Carlika that actually starts with us, right? I think menopause especially has layers of complexity to it, right? It's linked to women thinking this is another chapter, right? So is end of fertility end of your life? No. Is our purpose, and do we see our purpose in being fertile, right? So we've got to reframe the narrative about women's life, right? So if we have to look at it in chapters, so post-menopause, I think, is liberation, actually, right? If you're not ruled by your hormones, we need to look at it positively. Whereas the reason why women don't even want to admit they're having a hot flush, or they're depressed, or it could be menopause, is because they think, oh my God, people think I'm old, right? And I always think, you know what? If I've got lies, I've earned them, right? This is like, you've got, own it, right? I'm not going to be told by anyone else that I'm old and that I'm at the end of my life. No, right? So I think, yes, go to the doctor, but you've really got to start with yourself, right? And I think, Carlika, what you're doing amazingly is that you did that, right? You went through it, you took control of what was happening to you, and you now share that experience with your community, right? And that's very powerful. So we need more Carlikas who will do that, right?
Thank you.
And I completely agree. And I do want to highlight as well, there's lots of taboos, especially in different communities and underrepresented racial and ethnic communities, around a lot of medical things. And, things that happen with women, especially, being some of those. So Afsan, I know we talked about smear tests when we had our preparation conversation, and things like that in the South Asian community. And again, looking at the statistics maternity wise of Black women's pain not being believed in childbirth as the main reason why mortality rates are higher among Black women. So looking at some of these and then not following up after that, because again, there's a certain sense of shame that might come with a lot of it. Do you resonate with that as a women of color, women from underrepresented racial and ethnic communities? Do you see that specifically in those communities compared with white women, or do you think that actually everyone experiences things relatively similarly?
I think our experiences are obviously unique to us, right? But yes, I think the experiences have a lot in common. What's different, it's how you are perceived, right? So the perception of you and your pain or your problem is different. And having now spent 5 years in this space, I find that the solutions available are Western centric, right? And people like me or my mother, or from the Middle Eastern regions, Southeast Asian, we are being shoehorned into the solutions. And I think it's time that we are heard, right? And that if, for example, take cervical cancer and the screening, if women aren't going, right? My mother has never had a screening because she just finds it too invasive. We don't have to say, oh God, come on, we need to educate them. No. Well, why don't we look? Is there another way of doing this bloody screening, right? So we're refusing to look at solutions out there that weren't devised by women most of the time, right? So if you're devising some painful screening that women then don't go, right, then look at it differently, right? So which leads me very conveniently into what I'm looking at, having, a smart pad that is sort of will collect, if you like, it acts as a screening vessel from menstrual blood that can look at the microbiome, the vaginal microbiome, right? It's something that we ignore. And if there is a difference in the level of protein or yeast, could this be an indication of HPV, right? So there are things we can do, right? But we need to basically say the status quo is now outdated.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay to look at things differently.
Yeah. And I think that's been the case for so long. And I haven't looked into who invented them, but I would find it hard to believe that women invented smear tests or the mammogram just because they look like such painful procedures. And
well, look at the speculum. I mean,
yeah, I've shared with you, I haven't had a smear test before. I went for my first one and it was so painful. I cried and I screamed, and I have a very high pain threshold and I never went back. So we need to, but there's no follow-up from the doctors. That was clearly, it's normal to them for people to faint when they put in the coil, when they put in the speculum, and we need to re-examine that.
Yeah, but I mean, Alex, if you look at dentistry, right? So men and women both need the same dental care, right? How that space has developed, right? I remember as a child going to the dentist, it was horrendous. Like it's like as if they're digging a road, right? Now it's like a pleasure. I mean, it's the time I can switch off, right? I don't feel the pain. It's just a pleasurable experience. Why? Because it was painful for men. They dreaded it, right? Yeah. But there was a lot of investment, and it's different, right? The speculum hasn't changed. It looks like some sort of work tool from the 18th century. It's a torture tool, right? So we need to look at it saying, actually, if everyone were to have periods, if everyone were to go through menopause, what would the world look like? Well, I can assure you, it would not look like what it looks like now.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. I want to pivot, but I'm sure we'll come back to this because I'm sure people will have a few questions, but I do want to pivot very slightly in the 10 minutes or so we have, just to look at things from a more of a legal perspective and a policy perspective, because again, we will have clinicians watching this, but we will also have people who are HR professionals, EDI professionals in the workplace who can maybe advocate for some change in their organizations. So actually, both of you on this panel, we're talking about menopause and menstruation in particular right now. And there's been a lot of media around leave policies in different countries around both of those things and about putting different things into law. So maternity leave already exists, but menstrual leave only does for a fraction of people. So I think it was it Spain? I'm just gonna look at my notes here. Spain that introduced menstrual leave very recently, the first European country. And so I want to talk a bit about, Afsana, what you think about that as a concept, whether you think it should come under sickness leave or another kind of leave, or we should have a dedicated menstrual leave. And then also in the same vein, when we are talking about, because really we're talking about legislating women's experiences and their bodies, and it's a very big conversation at the moment in the US and in the UK about legislating women's bodies and putting them under the microscope. And in terms of menopause leave or putting menopause under the protected characteristics, the Equalities Minister for England has just declined to do that. There's been a big campaign around getting menopause under one of the protected characteristics, people who go through it, so that you can't in the Equality Act, so that you can't discriminate against people who have experienced or are experiencing the menopause. And she has declined to do that. So again, Karlika, would love to hear your thoughts too about whether it should be a specific protected characteristic or not. So whoever wants to answer any of those things first, please feel free.
Well, it may sound counterintuitive, but I'm totally against menstrual leave. I think it defeats the whole drive to normalize, right? If I have a migraine, I don't want a migraine leave, right? Because there's no taboo or shame attached to my migraine. I can just say, sorry, I can't come in. Can I work from home? Right? I think it should be exactly the same with periods, right? People experience periods in a different way. I fear on two fronts. One, that it will get weaponized, right? So employers may not necessarily say it, but they will think, as another question is, are you about to have a baby? Or, oh my God, like, do you have painful periods? So, in terms of equality, I don't think it's great. I do think, however, that employers must create an environment where their female employees feel comfortable enough to work from home, right? And also, period pain must not be debilitating. Look at Carlita's experience, right? If you legislate for a leave for a painful period that stops you from going into work, right? You are normalizing period pain. If you have that level of period pain, you should be going to a doctor, right? So let's not normalize the pain, right? But let's normalize the conversation around periods and menopause so we feel comfortable that we will not be laughed at, we will not be discriminated against, or will not be shamed. We will be nothing. It's just like asking to work from home because you've got a migraine. So that's my view.
I love that. And I am 100% with you, because if that's the case, then do you know the list of protected characteristics that would have to come about? Oh my God, my finger, right? It will be the simplest things and I love that we don't have to let's normalize the conversations. Let's normalize the education. Let's normalize the awareness. And when we even think of the workplace or anywhere, when it even comes to menopause, right? Menopause is a transition. It's not a handicap, right? It's not a disease. Can it lead to other things? But if we're more proactive with the awareness and the communication and the community and resources that are going to be good for you, right, on an individual basis, being that you should be so aware of your body and then in the workplace, companies, look, make those reasonable accommodations, right? Because I've experienced the fatigue and different things. And just last year, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. Now, even though that can fall under, right? Even me having a total hysterectomy can fall under these things. That's not what I'm out here. That's not my message, right? That's not what I'm educating on, because at the end of the day, COVID has shown us that a lot of people, we can work from home, right? There's another way, there's another resource, there's other ways that we can get around this. And so, number one, have the conversation with people, making women feel comfortable to even say, look, this is what I'm experiencing. I just may need 2 hours of leave where I can come in a little later, right? If your place of employment does not have a work from home entity. However, like I said earlier, COVID has taught us that there's so many ways that we can do things. And so when we broaden our spectrum of the mind to say, you know what, I don't have to make a legislative law to put this into place, right? Let's normalize the conversations of these things, that now we can make informed decisions. Because if that's the case, my God, the list would just go on and it'll never, ever stop. So I think if we just normalize the education, find the resources that's going to work for you according to your medical team, if you need to take off leave, and then not feeling afraid to speak up, because now you're in another transition. Think of a newborn baby, right? They're in a transition. So about time they're 1 and 2, hopefully you're still not giving them a bottle. They've transitioned, so their needs are different. So now as I'm transitioning, my needs may be a little different. Maybe I need a different shift. Maybe I do better working in the evening. Maybe I don't need to take on. So now we have to use our voice to speak up and advocate for ourselves, to say, look, I may need a different time frame to come in for work. Okay, wouldn't you rather give that extra 5-minute break, right? Wouldn't you rather give that a different shift than to have all of that wisdom and knowledge walk out the door?
Yeah.
So we can do it.
And just on the topic of speaking up and communicating, menstruation and menopause has been in the news a lot, especially in the UK recently. And not just because it's International Women's Day coming up, but actually these conversations we have seen have steadily increased, especially in the last year or so, around both topics. What do we do? Do either of you have an opinion on, since you work in this space, on what we do to stop these conversations from amounting to nothing, or to stop from these conversations from just being a trend, and something that, oh, we're talking about menopause leave and menstrual leave because it's in the news right now, and actually the news cycle is going to go around and something else is going to come up? Do you think we're in danger of it being a trend, and what do we do to stop it?
Well, it's definitely trending. It's definitely trending, which makes me upset.
I think things like menstrual leave can be misinterpreted as woke and trendy, right? This is our health, right? It's not something that just happens now and then we forget about it, right? So I feel that we mustn't be afraid of having conversations that could be considered counterintuitive, right? I think we shouldn't be afraid saying, I'm against menstrual leave, right? I'm all pro, periods being normalized, but so we need to, we can't allow one voice to become mainstream, because that's when it will die out, right? We need many voices without fear discussing, right, what's right for us individually, right? We are not this blob called women, right? Within this blob of women, we have voices, right? We have different experiences, and we should feel safe and welcome enough to be able to express them, right? So my problem is when my 14-year-old niece says, I put my hand up in class and says, sir, I need to go to the toilet. And the teacher says, no, you can wait. And she goes, no, I can't wait, right? I have my period. And he goes, I'm sure you can wait, right? So I've told her, you know what, you just get up and go, right? She gets up and goes, and she gets a negative. So these are the things that need changing, right? So let's start where the change will take the most effect, right? Let's start with that generation, give them a voice, empower them to stand up against that teacher and say, I'm going anyway, right? Because that teacher says, it's like, we just hold it in. For God's sake, how can you hold in menstrual
something that's
blood?
free flowing?
Right. And have you any idea how embarrassing it is for a 14-year-old, that anxiety that I may leak, right? So for me, the conversation has to start with the younger generation. We have to give them a voice, right? And make them feel that periods, it's something that is welcome, is a sign of health. This is your next chapter of life. And the same voice to perimenopausal women saying, embrace it, as you said, Carlika, embrace the next chapter.
I love that, because I do believe we educate, we empower, we embrace, right? And when you do those things, now we're in a position to encourage the next generation to say, you don't have to be silent, you don't have to be quiet, you don't have to dim who you are, right? Through each transition, because we're all, if we really think about it, we're always going through some type of life transition, right? Whether it's a new job, whether it's getting married, getting divorced, right? We're going having a new baby, all of these things, we're becoming an empty nester, right? So there's always seem like an opposite to all of this. But when we say, you know what, it's okay if you need to go breastfeed, go ahead, right?
It's fine.
It's okay. I shouldn't have to make an announcement that I need to go and change my pad because you don't have this, right? I shouldn't have to make an announcement that, oh my God, I'm having a hot flash, I just need to go. I should be able to get up. I should be able to go handle whatever I need to do, whether that's taking a 5 or 10 minute break, getting a drink of water. So when we find more people are educated, now we can build this support system that says, so I think about my boys who are 18 and 12. They can support the heck out of a menopausal woman. You hear me? But I don't exclude them from it, because I want you to be educated so that you can support that coworker. You can support your partner. You can support whoever it is. Even it may even be someone in the grocery store. My son literally saw a woman in Walmart And she was just like, oh my God. You know, she was doing all of it. And he was close to the restroom. He went and got her some cold paper towels. And he was like, here you go, just put them on the back of your neck. And then she was like, what you know about menopause? And he was like, trust me, I know. So when we're empowering them, now they're going to be the voices that stand up. They're going to be the voices that's heard to say, you know what, we're normalizing all of these conversations because it's a part of life. It's just life.
It's
And
biology.
so thank you. And it starts there. So when we
Yeah.
think of even in the school systems, if we can talk about the first period, then we should be talking about the last one.
Yes.
Because it's just a transition. And like you said, another chapter where we have the resources, we have the tools, we have the tips, we have individuals who are creating amazing platforms to get educated. And then this is not a trend, right? This is women's lives.
Yeah.
That they're going through. So this is not just you know, how bell-bottom pants and different clothing come back around. No, I don't get to say, menopause, I'm going to pick you up after I get off of work, right? I don't get to leave menopause in the car. Even as a postmenopausal woman, all of the symptoms and things go right with me in the building. And so when we normalize having the conversations, normalize speaking up for what it is that we need, then I think that makes it all better.
And thank you both for being part of this conversation, because this is what stops it being a trend. Having these conversations, talking to each other, building our communities, you know, is very powerful and actually very emotional when I hear you both talk about this, because obviously our own personal experiences, we think about how things have affected us in our lives. And I think especially this kind of, when we look at generational trauma as well, when it comes to women and women of color, and the fact that they don't tend to speak up when they have experienced horrific things. So lots of people are saying with the conversation around menopause at the moment, oh, you know, our grandmothers never complained about menopause, they just got on with it. That's something I'm seeing a lot in terms of the backlash around the talk about menopause. But the reality is they weren't empowered to speak up about it. They felt like they did have to power through and keep on going. And actually our lives look very different now as well to our grandmothers' generations. And you know, I had,
as it should, right? As it should.
absolutely.
I mean, what is progress? You know, progress comes from smashing down things that didn't work.
Yeah.
Right. So otherwise it wouldn't be progress, right? We will just stay still, you know, if we just go ahead and do whatever has been done, right? I would like to look at my granny and saying, actually, I'm in a different place. My daughter is going to be in a better place, right? I want my granddaughters to look back and think, oh my God, like you went to an office and there weren't any pads and tampons alongside the loo paper. Like, why? Right? So I would like the future that I envisage is that we don't have those conversations, right? That these conversations are redundant, right? We don't have conversations about, oh, when a boy has a nosebleed in class, is he allowed to leave the classroom because he can't help having a nosebleed, right? So what's the difference?
Yeah, absolutely.
My niece can't suddenly decide that, you know, she's a teenager, her periods are irregular, right? So education is key, and I think boys have to be comfortable, right? We've got to be comfortable with it, right? And we've got to be comfortable with aging, right? I always think, why is it that George Clooney with his gray hair and lines is considered really attractive, right? Give George Clooney, you know, turn it into a woman with it. Oh my gosh, she looks haggard and sort of tired, and why, you know? So we always look at, and I think, you know, I want where women are is where George Clooney is when it comes to aging, right? If it's fine for George, it could be fine for Georgina. So we need to change our perception, right? We need to stop saying this cream, you know, reverses aging. I don't want to reverse aging. I'm very happy with aging.
I won't even get started on those. I think it's Khloe Kardashian's gummies that changed basically changed the taste and smell of discharge.
Well, the latest somebody tagged me on was an edible vaginal deodorant. Just think about that. I mean, there is nothing right about that sentence.
Nothing.
No, no, you are
Right? But hey ho, they've raised money for it. So obviously it's something that we need.
Yeah.
And there will be a massive advertising campaign to make us believe that a vagina needs an edible deodorant.
Yeah.
That we need to start smelling like Febreze or Chanel No. 5. I mean, I have no idea what deodorant makes you smell like.
Right.
Yeah.
And on that slightly ridiculous note, but very real, I will just open up. We've got 4 minutes left, so actually I do want to close very soon, but if anyone has any burning questions, please feel free to unmute or pop them in the chat. We'll have like a 2-minute pause for you to think and do that, and then we can answer it. And if you don't, no worries, we're going to wrap up shortly anyway. So we'll just give people a moment while they digest those vagina gummies that we were talking about.
I'll pass.
Well, the Kardashians have a lot to answer for, I tell you.
Yeah, again, it's normalizing something that it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And it's creating, as you were saying, Afsan, what was the phrase you used? A solution looking for a problem.
A solution in search of a problem.
A solution in search of a problem, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we have anyone. There's been a lot of discussion in the chat, so I would encourage you both to go and read it after. We'll send it across. But if we don't have any input from anyone, we are going to wrap up a full 3 minutes early. Thank you so much, Afsana Parvizi Wayne and Carlita Basnak Menendez, for joining us at WERKIN for our International Women's Day chat on menstruation, maternity, and menopause. Please check out the recording. We'll put it up on, I think we'll have it up on getworkin.com, and we're sending it out to NHS trusts. So thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, please contact me afterwards and I can pass the questions on to our wonderful panelists today. Thank you, and see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye.